Hello, you've tuned to this week's episode of Next Steps Forward, and I'm your host, Chris Meek. As always, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Next Steps Forward is committed to helping others achieve more than ever while experiencing greater personal empowerment and well-being. Our guest today is Dr. Marcel Vanderwaat. As president of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, Marcel Vanderwaat brings more than 22 years of expertise in combating the interconnected criminal economies of organized crime, human trafficking, and sexual exploitation. Marcel has earned global recognition for his leadership, investigative expertise, and research contributions. His extensive background as a police investigator, hostage and suicide negotiator, and criminal case consultant continues to inform and inspire his work today. As a keynote speaker and published author, Marcel shares his expertise on international stages to train professionals from diverse disciplines across more than 30 countries. Dr. Marcel Vanderwaat, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me, and hello to your viewers.
It's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you here. We mentioned before the show how this is such a huge topic for me and for my listeners. And so thank you for what you do, and thank you for taking time to talk to us today. There are so many places we could start a conversation, and I'd originally tended to dive into the harmful effects of pornography later in our conversation, but there was a shocking and disturbing article titled Sex Without Women by Caitlin again in the Atlantic last week. It begins with the question, quote, "What happens when men prefer porn?" End quote, and discusses how the overwhelming prevalence of online pornography has changed relationships between young men and young women. Flanagan writes, "Watching online porn has become most adolescents' first sexual experience. The average 14-year-old boy today has seen more hardcore porn than all the American fighting forces in the Second World War." End quote. And then she goes on, "Because of the internet's power to desensitize people and wear down their natural responses to shocking things, and because of the way these algorithms work, young people quickly proceed to more and more extreme videos. And as it has always been, these earliest experiences with sexual events pass deeply into their sense of what sex should be." End quote. Can you pick up that thread and take us further into that question of what happens when men prefer porn and what's going on with teenagers in porn?
Well, I think it's a sobering statement, and just the vignette that you used there, Chris. But I mean, as a parent, obviously, it's completely understandable to feel alarmed. Just how easily kids stumble into the world of online pornography, and as you rightfully say, a lot of these exposures begins at a very, very young age. And the research is also very clear about the risks and the harms of pornography, and it's never just a benign viewing of obscene content, but there's very real impact on the brain and the way we men view the world. And obviously there's a separate conversation about women as well. There's also new evidence that suggests that there's an increasing pornography consumption among women as well, which is also something that you could probably draw a correlation or nexus with increasing number of women. We've seen recently some of these female teachers also being apprehended for sexual abuse complaints against scholars. So there's something to unpack just on that issue when it comes to women and pornography consumption. But just back to your question, very real world effects, Chris, and it never stays there. There's also evidence suggesting and showing how people act out on that, behaviorally, the correlation with sexual aggression, and also the content of the pornography and the different themes that we see in pornography is really nauseating and extremely problematic. And now we've read a lot over the last 2-3 years about Pornhub and the realities and the crimes associated with this massive pornography host. Just the criminal content on there, from child sexual abuse material, bestiality, rape videos. So it's tragic, but also people viewing that it's not benign, and a lot of that is internalized. And there's enough research showing how people act out, and also the link with sexual aggression. So deeply problematic, Chris.
Well, in this article I just quoted really hit me because, my wife and I have a son who literally just turned 13 a week ago.
Yeah.
And so he was right there at that age. And then you touched about how some female teachers have been getting arrested and caught and indicted for things that they've done with students.
Mhm.
Just over a year ago, there was a big FBI sting in South Florida called March Madness, the kind of March Madness for men's basketball.
Wow. Yeah.
33 people were arrested, teachers, high school coaches, members of clergy,
Yep.
people who are in your community, people you trust your children with every day.
Mhm.
And it shows that it can happen in your community. And so I think just having this conversation, this dialogue, I want people to open their eyes, open their ears, and to realize it is happening in your front and backyard. No one is, going to avoid this.
Yeah, and coming back to children, I mean, children are digital natives, surrounded by devices, smartphones, tablets, laptops, gaming consoles, and smart TVs, and those tools. I mean, they're wonderful, and just innovation, human innovation, ingenuity, which allows us to create these things. But they are also they also do act as gateways to the internet. We've published a one-page research document about 2 or 3 years ago, where we talk about the most dangerous playground is literally nowadays in the pockets of children. And hardcore pornography is readily available, it's frequently violent, and it's poorly controlled. And I mean, we all know, if we think about the formative years and just the different developmental stages of children and how the brain develops, the impact is significant. So I think we should all be far more serious and indignant about these things. So these are very, very real existential risks and harms and threats that's literally in our pockets.
Again, as a parent of a teenager, are there parental controls that we can put on their devices? I know I Googled, how to put on parental controls when my son got an iPhone, but they're smarter than us. We know that. They find their workarounds. Are there things that we can download or have our phones control theirs?
Yeah, Chris, to your point, it's there's several tools and applications out there that one can use that's downloadable. Some of these are free, and some of them comes at a cost. But the problem here is, unfortunately, this is where we should be pushing back. This should not be primarily the parents' responsibilities. To your point is, children grows up in this whole new world, and they are, more often than not, they are more tech savvy than parents. And often these on a device level, some of these device and app levels, sometimes they make it so difficult and so cumbersome for parents to navigate. I mean, there was once, about 2 years ago, we did a little internal study, and we kind of counted about 14 or 15 steps that a parent had to take in order to make a device safe for the children. So parents feel overwhelmed, and anxious just about the thought about their children, even though a child may not yet have a phone, but being among their peers where phones are so readily accessible. So there's a problem. But again, this is again where we need to start holding accountable, the technology companies out there. And that's the fight in which we are in. But you're right. I mean, again, parents feeling overwhelmed out there.
Well, parents also need to realize, Johnny and Susie, just because they're cute little Johnny and Susie, they might be looking for this stuff too. And so they can't just assume, not my kid, somebody else's.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So as great as someone's kid can be, they can also be surfing for different things.
That's very true.
You work on the international level, but you mentioned Pornhub specifically and some other sites like that. I know there are different state laws where you would need to register your age and I think sign up with either your name or email or something like that, so become verified if you're to prove that you're 18. Are you working with states on that, or should there be a federal policy for that? And again, this is just your opinion.
Sure. I mean, again, when we're talking about the issue of age verification, the national, we have in January 15th, our case was, we acted as an amicus in a federal matter for age verification. So, I mean, ultimately, this should be something we address on a, on a national level. But there's good things that are happening at state level, and the current court challenge, the Supreme Court challenge, where NCOSE, where we are one of the submitted the amicus brief, was in response to the Texas age verification law. So so it's common sense. Age verification should be common sense, and I think a lot of these big tech companies are pushing back, and they're using all of these, these theoretical arguments about, really theoretical, about free speech. At the end of the day, when you create something, we think about a vehicle, a motor vehicle, a car. If you know that car is able to do harm, whether wittingly, unwittingly, on the side of the driver or the engine, where some malfunction can occur, that's why there are brakes, that's why there are safety belts, that's why there are these rigorous tests and standards that any product, for that matter, goes through in order to make sure that the end user is safe. And really, age verification is just one of those, and there's so many examples of the fact that it can become a reality and be non-invasive and not infringe on any of these rights. So a lot of these arguments is really purely distractions, and it's just a way to try and circumvent measures in place to avoid accountability, because ultimately, we know that we will succeed on the issue of age verification. And when that happens, technology companies, developers will be held accountable. And I think that is the long game that we are in. And, opposition to these laws are, they also know that ultimately accountability is going to come, and it is going to impact the bottom dollar. So, yeah.
And to your point about the technology companies and their algorithms, it's baseball season here in the Northeast, and my son's starting baseball, and a few weeks ago, got him a new baseball bat. And the next day I log into wallstreetjournal.com, and the top banner is the actual baseball bat that I bought the day before.
It's crazy, Chris. And you know what? I'm going to use one example, a similar example. About 3 months ago, I spoke to a family member in South Africa, and we spoke about some random thing. The issue of a lack of sleep came up. And we just had a conversation for about 7 minutes. That was a Saturday morning. I was walking my dog. I went up the stairs into the condo, and it was about 11 o'clock EST, translated to South Africa. That's about 5 p.m. In South African time, and there was going to be rugby on, and I was switching to rugby through a YouTube channel. Exactly, that's what I got fed. Are you having problems sleeping? Sleeping, medication, and doctors and prescriptions and all of these things coming in. So it's incredible. It's incredible how the landscape in which we are, and it's deeply concerning and problematic.
And no one's immune to it.
Yeah.
Back to Flanagan's article. She also writes, quote, "You can't spend 15 minutes scrolling through a porn site without coming across a video in which a woman seems to be not performing fear or pain, but actually experiencing those things. If you're one of those people who enjoy watching coarse sex, you'll never be bored for a second of your life. As far as the moral equations of watching porn go, the one that matters is, are you excited by the obvious abuse of women, or have you learned to countenance that abuse as a necessary cost of your own pleasure? And which of those is worse?" End quote. Would you speak to the crux of that question and the minds of males who consume that material? And I say males, men and boys as well.
Yeah. Well, it comes also down to a few things. I mean, one of those are habituation, and and there's plenty of research on this. It starts off with there is this word, we don't often use it at NCOSE, but it's soft porn, or what they call vanilla porn, which is barely shows any nudity, and the more consumption there is, the more explicit the material becomes, and the more arousal happens in tandem with how concomitant to how explicit and violent material becomes. And the brain, obviously the tendencies, habituation happens. And we also know about neuroplasticity and how the brain can be altered by things like pornography and what we view. And yeah, to your point, it's at the end of the day, there really is a demand for these kind of material. And again, it never stops there. You actually have people being aroused, and this is very disturbing, but by rape scenes, by things like urophilia and coprophilia, where there are these extreme and obscene, images and content being played out, even bestiality. And there's also obviously the whole thing with sexual aggression. So it's deeply troubling, and that's obviously where a problematic pornography use comes in, where there is this this physical need that is being developed in order to watch this material. And again, it never stays there. There's always some form of acting out that does happen. So this is not benign.
Marijuana has been described as a gateway drug. We were talking a little bit about sex offenders. Is there any evidence that pornography is a gateway drug acting out antisocial or violent behavior?
Well, there really is. There is really a lot of evidence that points to that, Chris. There's just one example entitled "Male Peer Support and Sexual Assault: The Relationship Between High-Profile School Sports Participation and Sexual Predatory Behavior." And just one of the things that they found in that study was, men who more frequently consumed pornography more readily expressed a greater desire to act out their sexual fantasies involving coerced, intoxicated, or forced sex and sexual assault, if they obviously were assured that they would not be caught. That's one of the studies. And then there's also, I'm just giving you a little bit of a heads up here, but we've just concluded a study on 5 ways that pornography and the pornography industry contributes to sex trafficking. And I'm just going to list 5 of them for you. And I've seen this. So I'll just quickly qualify this, Chris. I've infiltrated criminal networks in my work as a former law enforcement officer. And a lot of the work, in one way, shape, or form, it would involve a brothel, and I cannot recall ever going into a brothel, as a law enforcement officer, where there was not a constant stream of pornography playing, either in the reception area, the lobby area of the brothel, or in the different rooms. So pornography is a consistent and a coherent thread in all cases related to brothels that I've investigated and responded to, but also sex trafficking, and just some of the points that we've documented, and we'll release this soon as part of a fact sheet. But 5 of them are: pornography is used to groom young victims of sex trafficking who lack sexual experience. That's the one. The second one is: women, men, and girls and boys are sex trafficked for the production of pornography. Again, pornography kind of in the middle of this entire ecosystem of abuse and sex trafficking. The third one: pornography is used as advertising for those sex trafficked within prostitution marketplaces. And then these 2 are very interesting. Pornography fuels the demand for prostitution, and as a result, it fuels sex trafficking. And it's also shown, research has shown that men who are frequently pornography users are 3 times more likely to purchase sex than other men. And then the 5th one: some men who purchase sexual access to people in the sex trade use pornography to build sexual excitement in advance, and may act out what they see in pornography. And again, I've seen this in my work, where where men would enter into brothels, and they would inquire whether there are sometimes they ask very explicitly for somebody that's of a younger age, which inevitably denotes a child, and somebody who's willing to do some extreme things, and some of those I've mentioned, are things like coprophilia, urophilia, where and this is things they see on pornography, where they are sexually aroused by being able to urinate on another person or able to defecate on another person. These are extreme things, but nobody is born with that kind of pathology. And a lot of this is absolutely fueled and amplified by pornography. And some of these themes, when we think about strangulation and even race-related themes. I mean, serial rape. I mean, one of these things I've investigated cases of serial rape. When you have the same offender, well, you don't know yet it's the same offender, but we talk about modus operandi, and we're talking about a specific signature, and a signature is that one thing that just literally stands out. And I remember this one matter that I was involved in is the person would always ask, would walk past a woman and would ask, do you have a $2 that you can borrow me? And then that would translate into a rape. There's always a strangulation, and there's always some reference to asking the person to be positioned in a specific way. And pornography usually fuels these things. Nobody is born with these ideas or concepts. So yeah, it's pervasive, and it has very, very real world impact on sexual abuse and exploitation, Chris.
It's just sickening to listen to all this, and we've got another half an hour of the show left, so I'm hoping I can make it. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation has been around for a long, long time, but many people, and especially people in our audience who live in other countries, may not be aware of the center.
Yeah.
Would you share its history with us?
Sure, yeah. So, I think it was in the fall of 1962, an anonymous individual placed sadomasochistic material on the corner. I think it was on the outside of St. Ignatius School on Manhattan's east side. And what happened then, a 10-year-old child found this material and showed it to other school children. So the mother confiscated this material and she brought it to a meeting of mothers. And as a result, one of NCOSE's, one of our first heroes here was Reverend Morton Hill, was asked by his superior to look into the matter to see how widespread this issue of pornography is. And he then investigated and recruited other religious leaders to look into the issue of pornography. So over the years, it started off initially known as Operation Yorkville in New York, and then the name went into morality in the media. And over the years, it was it was kind of, the focus was at its core was the issue of pornography. But I think our former leaders and members of NCOSE soon learned that pornography is this one cog in a system of, as part of a web of sexual exploitation. So over this past 6 decades, we've learned that none of these forms of sexual abuse or exploitation ever exists in its own private universe. Pornography doesn't, child-on-child sexual abuse doesn't, sex trafficking doesn't, prostitution doesn't. All of these in one way, shape, or form overlaps and informs the other. So over a period of 6 decades plus, that's been our mission, is to unravel and expose this web of sexual exploitation. And this all started in 1962. And then we became the National Center on Sexual Exploitation in about 2015, and made it very, very clear that our focus is the web of sexual exploitation. We have a variety of tactics in which we address this issue, and that has really been informed by decades of research experience, and also grappling with the mercurial nature of these issues, and obviously the overlap of modern society and technology. So those were the humble beginnings, Chris.
And how has sexual exploitation evolved over those 6 decades? And how has the center evolved accordingly to take on the sex industry?
Great question. So how has it evolved? I think what we are seeing now is, I often speak about the globalization of indifference. And unfortunately, there's definitely been the surge in indifference, I would argue, and we see that you could definitely draw these inferences from research as well, when online pornography exploded in the early 2000s, where again, when we talk about how people act out, sexual objectification, we often see this in the media. We see this in modern culture, lyrics in music. So what we began to see is just this fusion of all things sexual objectification, obscene, and indifference, because again, to our earlier conversation about what pornography does to the brain and how that informs real world behaviors, and that just create this conviction that we need to have a multi-pronged approach to do this, Chris. So we combat the intersection of sexual exploitation through corporate advocacy. We do public policy, civil litigation, research, and then obviously also our parent center, which we hope will launch later in this year. But again, every one of those strategies, the one informs the other, and we see that work, and ultimately our main focus is the mass scale prevention of sexual exploitation, and it can be done by using these different prongs. You can actually address the issue at all the different levels, and ultimately it comes down to a systemic addressing of the issue of sexual exploitation.
You've mentioned some of the research the center does in a white paper. Where can people learn more?
Oh, well, all of this is on our website, endexploitation.org. Please go to that website. I mean, all our research is there, our publications. We have some amazing publications coming down the pike. Some of our recent publications, revolved around issues like demand reduction, the role of men in purchasing sexual access to women and children, how to end that. That was a federal study. We did that on a National Institute of Justice grant. And then we have a big research project that's launching in the next 35 days. And that's called Beyond the Fantasy, and it's on the issue of pornography, but also image-based sexual abuse. And then we veer into the issue of artificial intelligence and synthetic materials. So all of that is available on our website, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation's website, endexploitation.org. But our research also appears on academic platforms like ResearchGate and academia.edu. So, yep.
Great. Thank you for that. What are the biggest challenges the center is currently tackling in the fight against sexual exploitation?
I think, well, some of biggest challenges at the moment, I think I'm going to just touch on again on the globalization of indifference. The getting people to see what we've seen and observed and researched over the last six decades. And I think media, mainstream media, popular culture often is and the message that people are bombarded with is totally antithetical to what we see every day in our work. And whether it's research, whether it is our civil lawsuits, once you go into the rudiments of these cases, then you do realize that something like a brothel, which a lot of people globally, and there's also been a move locally in America to call for the decriminalization of prostitution. Some segments, right? It's definitely not a widespread view that something like that needs to happen. But there's constant lobbying in every state for prostitution to become legal or decriminalized. And they often use these very kind of very romantic, hyphenated language, and often, you know, the Pretty Woman movie scenario comes across, where people can really do this and sell, you know, their bodies, and it comes at no harm, and that men are just kind of benign, you know, guys that's just doing what guys normally do. So there's all of these rape myths that is entirely you know, this loss, these two pieces just doesn't correlate so or align. And so that is one of the biggest challenges, is having people see from moving people from a no to a maybe, and from maybe to a yes. This is the problem, and yes, I have a responsibility as a parent, as a husband, you know, as a religious spiritual leader, as a teen, not to entertain, not to indulge in these things, because there are real world consequences. But, you know, so we often find ourselves working against the stream of popular culture and what is put out there. So it's a constant kind of these two irreconcilable ideological framings of what is good, what is right, and what is dignity. You know, we are in the business of protecting human dignity at its core, and what the world and mainstream media often sends out is entirely conflicted to that.
You've mentioned how the National Center on Sexual Exploitation takes a multi-pronged approach to combating sexual exploitation through policy advocacy, legal action, corporate accountability, survivor support, and public awareness. I always like to take these one at a time. I might not have them in order of importance. So first, policy and legislative advocacy. The Take It Down Act. How does the center work with lawmakers and government agencies to shape policies?
Great question. So again, we are a nonpartisan organization. So I think that often, you know, we believe that has really worked well over the last, you know, 60 plus years, Chris, is the fact that, you know, we go out of our way to make sure that we, you know, pursue policies where there are widespread buy-in, and that's just on the issue of nonpartisanship. The issue of the Take It Down Act is just such a great example of unanimous kind of buying from people on all sides of the political spectrum. The same with the CD 230, the Communications and Decency Act, which really gives immunity to big tech platforms, you know, hosting and perpetuating this content online. You know, everybody on that, I mean, we were in the Senate Judiciary hearing where the big technology, you know, CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg, X, Twitter, TikTok, when the parents came into the room and everybody had the pictures of their children, you know, who are 16 forever or 17 forever, you know, many of them died by suicide. And that's been very powerful, seeing how we can make a difference by getting people together into the same room and really listening to parents, you know, listening to those very real world stories of a child losing their life. So we try our very best to follow this approach, and it's really worked well. So ultimately, from a public policy perspective, it's fighting bad laws and making sure that we are able to pass good laws. And that the Take It Down Act is just one of those that we are very, very excited about. Yeah.
And how about the new plague that we touched on briefly before about sextortion?
Oh,
I recently read an article, I forget where it was, I think it was People Magazine, about how teenage boys are the ones with the highest suicide rate right now because they're getting lured in by people who come off as being a friend.
yeah.
And this one particular 14-year-old boy in Wisconsin, it happened within a matter of hours of them luring him in and just him taking his life.
It's very, very sad, Chris. So just in a year, I think it's between 2023 and 2024, there was a 150% increase in reports on the issue of sextortion. So yes, I mean, you know, what this fundamentally comes down to is that somebody. It's usually, let's say, a young girl befriending somebody on the other side of a line, which could be a teenage boy. But this girl isn't really a real person or a real girl. There's a predator, and we've seen the research. I've personally worked with some of these criminal networks, the Nigerian criminal networks on the African continent. But more of the recent cases has directly been connected to some of these criminal networks, so you would have somebody reaching out as purporting to be a 14-year-old girl. There's a relationship starting, and then there's a request from the girl, which is obviously the predator or the perpetrator, for the boy to send explicit images. Those images are then passed along, and as soon as that image is submitted, and as soon as that image lands in the proverbial hands of the perpetrator, he makes himself known or not. But what happens is that's where there is a request for money, and we're not talking about small, $10 or $20. I mean, $1,000, $3,000, $5,000. And if that money is not paid over, that these images will then be released to their friends and their connections. And we've seen, Paul Rafil is an open source intelligence analyst, and he's done phenomenal work on the issue of sextortion. And there are several examples, Chris, where a connection with a user, a minor, let's say teenage boy, 16 years old, on the one end of the phone, where that connection, let's say hypothetically at 11 o'clock, that connection was made, and 11 o'clock, the rapport was built. 5 minutes later, the image was sent. Literally within 30 minutes later, that child is no more. So there's so many examples out there of a death by suicide that happens within 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and it's tragic.
You touched earlier about the legal action you're part of with the amicus brief from the Supreme Court. You've just touched on corporate accountability, but how about survivor support?
Yeah.
How do you get engaged with that? How do you connect with the survivors of sex trafficking and pornography, and what support do you provide?
Great question. At the end of the day, we truly believe survivors and their voices and their lived experiences are extremely important, is unmissable when targeted and well-informed policy and new laws are created. We are not a frontline service provider, so we don't provide frontline psychosocial services and support to survivors, but we do include survivors in every aspect of our work, from a policy perspective, at state level, testifying in support or against a specific act. We always have survivors at the front end testifying, and we provide that support. We assist with a briefing, and enable survivors to get out there and to get into those very important platforms and arenas where their voices are to be heard. And obviously with our law center, when we talk about our civil litigation, we are representing survivors, or Jane Doe's as referred to them. In X videos case, we've got a case against X or Twitter that's still ongoing. We have the case against, a brothel in Nevada. We're involved with the Andrew and Tristan Tate matter. These two influencers, that's a separate conversation as well, very problematic. But in all of these cases, we have plaintiffs and we represent them. And so that's how we work alongside survivors, representing them and making sure that they get justice that they deserve. And also in our research, when we've completed a research study, we would make sure to make that available to the survivor community to speak into that, and to poke holes if holes needs to be poked into it. So it's very important, survivors have that lived experiences, and they have that insider perspective that many researchers or advocates or policymakers simply don't have. And I always tell people we all have blind spots and we all don't always know when we don't know. And Survivors helps us with that.
And certainly there's public awareness. Appearing in exceptional words is public awareness, but we know that that's not enough.
Yeah.
What are your most effective public awareness channels? What messages do you want to stay with people?
Well, the one that is forthcoming on Thursday, and Thursday we are launching our Dirty Dozen list, our annual Dirty Dozen list. And I think one of the first messages, I mean, at a meta level, is to say that, man, a world free from sexual abuse and exploitation is possible. It's not a pipe dream. There are very real things that can be done and happen, and that's on all of these levels: legal. We often talk about the PESTEL model. Now, a PESTEL, PESTEL, that's usually the model that we use to do scenario planning. I've done scenario planning in my life, and basically what that denotes, you've got the political, the economic, the sociological, technological, the economic, and the legal environment. And that in every one of these spheres, that active citizenry is critical. And the issue of fighting sexual exploitation overlaps all of these spheres. So, and by addressing all of these spheres through civil litigation, public policy, corporate advocacy, research, and our parent center, that you can fundamentally move the needle, and on a mass scale level, a world free from sexual abuse and exploitation is possible. So it's not a pipe dream. So the first thing is for people to know you can actually do something about this. This can really happen. And the other one is that people, parents have immense power in speaking into and hold accountable big technology platforms. We know that big technology and big tech, they don't fear, law enforcement. There's very little that they fear. They don't self-police because nobody's really holding them accountable. But what they do fear, Chris, is when that day arrives, and it's going to come, where a single parent can step into a court and provide the evidence of platform A, B, or C, or D that was directly, indirectly complicit in a situation of harm that befell a minor, and that hypothetically or real in the case of sextortion ultimately led to somebody's death. We are not talking about thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. These are going to be multi-million-dollar claims. And I think that is something that big tech fears. And it's not just going to be one parent. There are going to be countless parents that's going to be empowered to do this. So the message there to parents is everybody can do something, active citizenry, be involved with signing these sign-ons and these petitions. And that's why we are there to hold parents' arms up in their respective journeys, and then grappling with navigating this very, very complex landscape of technology, policy, law, and again, the globalization of indifference, because you need people that sincerely care and that sincerely invested in bringing about this world that we truly believe in.
And to that point, in today's world, everyone's busy, everyone's tugged in 1,000 different directions,
Wow.
but you have to be involved in your children's lives.
Yeah.
Check their phones, check their tablets, whether they're asleep or not, but make that part of the policy just so you know exactly what's going on to hopefully prevent some of these sextortion and other types of tragic events.
Yeah.
A moment ago, you mentioned the Dirty Dozen list. Who's on that list, and are the repeat offenders on there?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an entire page for the Dirty Dozen list, and everybody's been on the list pretty much. All technology companies. I mean, Meta has been on there more than once. Apple, Spotify, TikTok, Cash App. So and these are all platforms that show through actual evidence-based research how they enable and perpetuate sexual exploitation on their platforms. I mean, just one example. And that's also where the Take It Down Act comes in, where an example would be where, non-consensual image-based sexual abuse content has been uploaded by a third party on a platform. And where a victim who fell victim to that illegal content being uploaded on a platform has tried for months and months and even years on end to get that off, Chris, and with no solution, and literally having to live knowing that I've actually got a response from some of these platforms saying, well, it doesn't, it's not against our our regulations and laws as a company. So there are some of these examples, and so you can imagine the harm, and the trauma. It's like this digital tattoo that you carry, and that's where the Take It Down Act will now come in, and that's about first and foremost, age verification plays into that, but also that this content must be removed within 48 hours. So yes, but some of the successes we've had over the years, I mean, those include we've had transformative victories with Google, Netflix, Hilton Worldwide, Verizon, Walmart, and including the U.S. Department of Defense. So the Dirty Dozen list has really had a phenomenal impact. And just to give you a heads up, this year we are probably addressing one of the biggest giants, that if this giant falls, the echo and the reverberation will be felt globally. But it's a big one, so I hope some of the viewers and the listeners could join us on Thursday.
And that's endextortion.org.
At End Exploitation.
Exploitation, excuse me.
Exploitation.org, yeah. And you can just say NCOSE Dirty Dozen list 2025, and you'll definitely be directed to the website.
So I know that the Take It Down Act has passed the Senate. Now it's back in the Congress. Do we expect it to be passed? Is President Trump at the same time soon? Who are the cheerleaders on the Hill in both chambers?
Oh, I mean, we are just in awe of Senator Cruz and Klobuchar that championed this. So massive kudos to them, Chris. But yeah, I was in the room about 3 weeks ago when the First Lady, Melania Trump, me and our VP, Dr. Eleanor Gayton, we were invited to be in the room where she briefed the media. There was obviously more media in the room than anybody else, but we were there when she gave her vote of support for the Take It Down Act, and she did a phenomenal job in just laying out this harm and just the mean-spiritedness of what is out there. And on both her left and to her right-hand side, she had teen survivors of image-based sexual abuse that each in a very, very courageous way shared their own experience with this illicit content being non-consensually uploaded on these platforms, and just the incredible trauma that goes along with that. So she always took in this mother figure. She was incredibly articulate in how she laid out the problem, but at the same time, just a generosity of spirit just shown through in the way that she encouraged just these 4 young teens that were sitting next to her. So she's a hero in all of this, and I think Eleanor, one of our public policy people, mentioned she can't remember ever the First Lady standing up and speaking and giving her support so strongly for a specific piece of legislation that we hope and believe will pass this year.
We mentioned briefly before the show that people think this doesn't happen in their neighborhood, that it's only in the shadows, it's not going to affect them. But how do these people know where to find the sex traffickers right there in their own communities?
Okay, that's where technology comes in, right? We know that sex buyers, people that purchase sexual access to women and children and to other men as well, you know, the way they communicate, there's always an online platform through which they are able to reach traffickers, pimps, and we all have mobile phones as well. So, you know, it's a criminal ecosystem, you know, that allows these crimes to flourish. But again, well, just to your point, what is very clear is, you know, sex traffickers intentionally offers children and women to be raped at a price, and men, those who purchase sexual actors, intentionally pays to rape, you know, women and children. You know, they care precious little in terms of who and how they harm people. And usually there is this an online connection, and people self-organize, and they create these criminal economies which in their own way self-organize. But one of our biggest strategies here is the issue of consumer level demand. And we always say, without sex buyers, sex traffickers cannot exist. It's sex buyers who creates the market forces, and it fuels the market forces that creates the roles of traffickers. So without a man purchasing sexual access to a woman or a child, without that person, a trafficker cannot exist. And every sex trafficking act has been paid by $1 from a male sex buyer. So, you know, I always say, you know, sex buyers are the critical missing link in this equation.
Marcel, we only have a few minutes left. Take us in the show, some words of wisdom, and how we can help support your cause and end this devastating crisis.
Yeah. Well, I think firstly, I mean, please do follow us on social media. You know, we are on X. NCOSE is on LinkedIn as well. They can follow me on LinkedIn as well. I'm on there, and I regularly post weekly about the work we do. And always take action. I mean, on our website, again, endexploitation.org, you know, we always have an action page. You know, whatever the issues are, you know, if you're going to click on the issue of prostitution or pornography or child-on-child sexual abuse, there's always an action page. It will take you literally 15 seconds to complete one of those actions. Please do take those actions, but also take hope. I truly believe, Chris, there's a sleeping giant of common sense that's waking up finally, you know. And I think when that giant of common sense wakes up, it's going to dispel a lot of rape myths. It's going to dispel a lot of ideas in terms of what masculinity is, what fatherhood is, what leadership is. And it's also going to dispel this idea that women in pornography, you know, enjoys the sex that people see from the outside looking in, which is not the case. So I just think that's kind of the very broad framing that I'm using of common sense that I truly believe will eventually set in. And I think we could expedite the rousing of that sleeping giant by everybody literally taking action, you know, on our website, following us on social media. So, yeah, there's hope. It's not a pipe dream. This can happen.
Yeah, everybody listening, on the website, it's time to wake that sleeping giant. Dr. Marcel van der Watt, thank you so much for the important work that you do, and really thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
I'm Chris Meek. We're out of time. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Until then, stay